the monophonic synthesizer, which obviously is limited in what it can do, and therefore you might say you'd be crazy to want to have one because it won't play more than one note at a time. It doesn't have presets. It doesn't have all the recall that sort of a modern synthesizer might have. But it has some kind of simplicity in its component and its structure, which gives it a sort of soul, which I think is not retro. I think this is something that's living on. I think it's something that is sort of has a pathway into the future in a way that some of these digital things are missing. I'm sure some of them will too, but that time will only tell that. Whereas I think some of these instruments are still with us because they've survived the test of time. And okay, you could say they're retro, but the reason, but so is a violin retro. We're still using it. It's still being written for. It's still current. So I think that I'm sort of saying my money is on a mini Moog as being something that will be with us for hundreds of years as an expressive instrument. In 1969, there was a record that came out called Switched on Bach, which had this iconic cover of somebody dressed a little bit like Bach in the full kind of Baroque outfit, but actually in front of a load of synthesizers. And it had an immediate impact. It was a very big selling record. Lots of people who weren't into classical music bought it, and lots of people, everybody playing in this group remembers first hearing it and the kind of effect it had on us all. And yes, it went on to be, a big promotional tool for the synthesizer. It kind of came of age at that point as a serious instrument, and entered everyone's consciousness in a very big way. And I just thought, well, has anybody actually tried to play this, not as a studio multi-track with one person layering themselves up, which is obviously what he did, but as an ensemble? Has a life and as any ensemble does, because everyone's listening to each other and responding to the way they play. And we've kind of grown up with these instruments for long enough to maybe get to grips with how to play them. None of them have presets, so it's up to you to kind of keep track of where you are by looking at the dials. And so when we made this recording, they were done as long takes. Sometimes there's a bit of editing because some takes were better than others, as in any classical recording. But essentially, it's the same aesthetic as making any classical recording, where you get into a room, you put up some microphones, and you play. There's about 4 mini Moogs in the group, but then there's some other Japanese instruments, there's some American instruments. I mean, the Japanese were amazing, where they took in the 70s the whole idea of the synthesizer and they ran with it in a way no other country did, in the kind of sheer profusion of different varieties and flavors of instrument that they came out with. And they make sounds that the Moogs don't make. They have some of them a robotic, electronic pureness to them that is sort of shunned by sort of the Moog people, because the Moog love the kind of woody, warm, sort of more naturalistic animal sound that, say, a mini Moog makes. But there's a value to it in combination, so you get more variety. To have some of these more kind of sci-fi sounding, alien, pure sine tones or square waves or whatever they are. You can almost hear the resistors buzzing. You can sort of see the oscilloscope waveform of some of the sounds these more kind of basic instruments make, but they're of great value, I think, to the ensemble. great vision that Robert Moog had was, rather than just being a pure scientist and saying, oh, now we can make sound, and this is what a voice sounds like because we've analysed it, and it goes and has a vibrato and everything, which a singer would probably go, no, that doesn't sound like that at all. Thank you very much, Mr. Scientist. He actually went out to musicians and said, well, what would you like? What would you like it to be able to do? That's, I think, why his synthesizers became the first really successful global there was a global uptake on them, because they were very much thought of as with the musician in mind. And so they have a kind of beautiful structure. You'll have your choice of oscillator, what kind of sound. Is it a square wave, a sine wave, a sawtooth wave? For example, a clarinet is very much a square wave sound because of the dynamic, the way the instrument is constructed, whereas an oboe, which is conical, or a trumpet or a brass instrument, is a sawtooth wave or a triangle wave. And so in theory, you're delving into the components that make sounds that the existing instruments use. But of course, then they can do much more, and you can wobble them around, send them into the stratosphere, send them into, deep down. These instruments will make sounds that no acoustic instrument would be able to make. That's one of the things. They open up the bass, which is why, of course, the Mini Moog became this great kind of bass machine. And on tracks like Michael Jackson's "Shake Your Body," there's a fantastic bass line which is played on the Moog, and a lot of other kind of great dance records. Hitherto there just hadn't been that much bass around, and that was one of the things that the Mini Moog got sort of its name for, was producing huge amounts of bass, which of course at the time they were developing speakers and that would produce bass. But if you actually record, say, a double bass, it's not that much. There's a lot of high harmonics, and there's not that much bass. In an orchestra, if you want a lot of bass, you've got to get a lot of tuba players and a lot of double basses to get it. But that could, you could do that with just one Moog probably, and a big speaker. So that was another thing that they kind of introduced into music, was the kind of range of sound that was available. They would go higher than a piccolo and lower than a double bass. So that was another kind of factor that they brought to music. I'm not so interested in just reproducing classical music or music from the heyday of the synthesizer in the 70s, or it'd be very easy to become kind of Giorgio Moroder, Vangelis tribute band, wouldn't it? But I'm much more interested in exploring what these instruments can do now in a way that they haven't done before, and look to the future of how they can exist as time goes on. I think that, it has all these different sides, doesn't it? And historically it has, whether it's on the one hand Stockhausen doing contactor and making all these otherworldly sounds that are sort of hitherto unheard, traditionally unmusical sounds of, just noises, you might say. And on the other hand, people like Wendy Carlos or Giorgio Moroder, or, I think they're great. I think that, Vangelis' score to Blade Runner is something, if you don't know it, you should go and listen to it. And it's a great use of the synthesizer as this very futuristic, dystopian vision. And I think that is a big part of the synthesizer, what it brings to us. So in a way, it's the kind of, and of course, a film like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Actually, the creatures that come to land are all synth players, it turns out, and that's what they do. They communicate us in a kind of synth language that some professor who's also a musician manages to pick up on, and he's playing back to them, isn't he, on actually an ARP Odyssey, or is it an ARP 2600? So anyway, some seminal bit of 70s kit, this seemed to be in sync with this vision of the future, that music was going to be made on synthesizers to the point where it could communicate with alien life forms in the future, which I think is a wonderful vision, and I hang on to that, without trying to be retro. I'm not sure whatever vision we've got of the future at the moment is as interesting as that. And I think that's one of the, why I carry a torch for these sort of vintage instruments. I think they haven't been explored, or they represent a spirit of an age that was a very healthy one and rather wonderful, generous and exploratory and trying to find new ways of doing things, which was very healthy and I sort of slightly miss.